At the very end of my drinking, I would wake up. I need to drink at least 3 bottles. And if I could get through those 3 bottles, I would have a reasonably good day. But if I didn't, I would just spend the day shaking on the sofa. I had my blood checked. And after all my kind of partying in Thailand, it was obvious my liver function was being compromised. Even when I was homeless, I was still kind of looking down on people. I always thought I knew better than other people.
Hi everybody, Pete here from Thairish Times. Hope you're keeping well. What's the story with you? Today we're going to interview a man. His name is Paul. He's an Irish man and he had a battle with alcohol. His whole life was consumed with alcohol. A battle that seemed insurmountable. Paul hit rock bottom. He was drinking every day. He was homeless on the streets of London. He even moved to Saudi Arabia to get away from the drink, the demon drink. And even then he couldn't get away from it. So Paul says that if he was going to drink himself to death, he'd rather do it somewhere nice. So he moved to Thailand. So we're going to get into all Paul's story today. And then how he beat alcoholism in Thailand. And the story with that one is super interesting, fascinating, unique. So let's get straight into it. Me, Paul Garrigan. If you like the video, hit me a like, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below. I'm always interested to read what you thought about the interview as well. So let's get straight into it.
All right, Paul, thanks very much for coming on the show here. As I said to you just off camera there, before we started, that I was really looking forward to this story, and I'm buzzing. I've been buzzing all week for this one. So let's go all the way back to the very start. Can you tell everybody how your alcoholism started?
You could say that my alcoholism started even long before I found alcohol, that I actually drank alcohol. One of my earliest memories was my communion when I was 7. And after we went to a pub, and obviously I wasn't allowed to drink, but I actually pretended to be drunk. So that was a kind of sign of things to come, basically. And as soon as I could get my hands on it, I was kind of very curious about alcohol as a young age, growing up in Ireland. I mean, I haven't actually been back in Ireland in a bit, but I imagine it hasn't changed that much. But I know when I grew up, it was very much part of the culture. And I loved the way alcohol made people behave, well, at least the people I saw. So I'd see people would make them much more kind of lively, much more, you know, fun to be around. And I kind of realized that I wanted that because I didn't feel very comfortable in my own skin. And the amazing thing is, I mean, that when I was 7, when I was just kind of pretending to be drinking, I went from being like, very shy to feeling like acting like an extrovert. And that was even without the booze. If only I'd kind of realized it just kind of that I didn't require the booze. Well, for me, by the time I was kind of, I suppose, 16, I'd started drinking regularly. And, it got worse from there. I entered my first rehab, St. John of God's in Ireland when I was 20.
In a previous interview you did, you said that you had a fascination with drink. Can you describe that fascination?
I just saw it as this kind of magical substance that made things seem better. And in the beginning, it did seem to do that. In the beginning, I loved everything about it. We were able to kind of sneak into pubs and stuff like that. And, like about saying I was 16 and stuff. And I just loved that whole thing. And, when I was 18, I moved to Oxford and it was all this kind of drinking in beer gardens. And I just have it just seemed to be the solution to so many of my problems. And it always kind of seemed that anything could happen when you start drinking. Like it was always like going on an adventure, if you know what I mean.
Let's talk about that. So you moved from Dublin to London then?
Actually, my first job was in Queensworth in O'Leary. It was I don't know if it was an old a supermarket chain. I don't think it exists anymore. But I kind of started off with them, but eventually I kind of moved up to England and got a job in a bar when I was 18. And back then you were allowed to drink behind the bar. And I kind of took full advantage of that. And back then in the beginning I could seem to handle it. I could handle it. But I soon got a bit of a reputation, for the kind of the drunken Irishman. But I loved that at the time. I thought it was funny. I didn't realize that there was a downside to that as well, that no one takes it very seriously.
Were you drinking every day at this stage?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Would it be wake up and crack open a beer and just go out, drink throughout the whole day, or?
There were days like that. I actually, I suppose after about a year, I became the cellar man. And part of the duties of the cellar man was to clean the pipes. And we had the cleanest pipes probably in England at the time, because when you clean the pipes, you got to taste, you take a taste of what was, after you'd flushed everything through, you take a taste of the beer to make sure it was okay. And so and that was one of my favorite jobs.
What was the story then? Because in another interview you did, you said you became homeless in London. Then after that, how did that happen?
Well, basically, what happened in Oxford, I met a girl, and we left out, and she realized that there was a problem with my drinking, and she could have, she talked quite reasonably. If she got me out of Oxford and got me out of bars, I would I would improve. She saw potential in me, but I think the potential just wasn't there then. So we left. She was Scottish, but what we did first of all was we left Oxford and we moved back to Dublin. And when I was in Dublin, I actually for the first time discovered that there was things called early houses, and I used to go to them at 7 in the morning. And and so after a while of the early houses, me spending all our money on beer, we kind of eventually moved over to Scotland, and I didn't improve there, so she kicked me out. And by that stage, I was 20, and I came back to Ireland, and that's where I kind of got my first treatment. And when I went to that first, treatment place, it was only to get her back. I wasn't actually that serious about quitting, but I did. I stopped for a few months. But then what happened after that was I continued. I went back. I got back to. Then I did move to London, and I worked in bars there. But I also kind of realized something else. I started studying. I actually got kicked out of school when I was 15 for stealing alto wine. I What happened was, yeah, I was actually, and that was down in Cork. We were living in Cork. Yeah, my parents split up, and I ended up kind of moving with my dad for a while. But I kind of went off the rails, and I started getting into lots of trouble. I went basically from the top class in one school to the bottom class in another school, and I just went completely off the rails. And like that ended with me being expelled from school in Cork because we broke into, but actually there's a number of things, but stealing alto wine was one of them. And I got so drunk that I kind of, fell off a fence, and I think I got caught then, from what I remember. Um, but there was other things as well. So eventually I had to move back to Dublin. But I was, my school days were finished. But what I did when I went to, when I moved back to London, I actually started studying again. And I actually did my A levels over there by correspondence. And then I kind of, eventually I got enough to be accepted for university. But by then I would have been 25. And I'd actually, I was still drinking heavily, but I'd actually worked hard enough to be accepted into university. And on the day that my acceptance letter came, I went into a complete meltdown for no reason. I just went on a binge. I think it started off as celebration, but it ended up in this kind of crazy binge where I could no longer go to work. And I couldn't pay for my rent, and I actually ended up. That's when I ended up in the streets.
Like, I'd just like to know the mindset, right? Because I've met a couple of alcoholics in my life, and they've gone on and off the drink. When you were having that first initial drink, or when you were ordering that drink, did you know, like, okay, I'm about to do something that's like, what was that thought process when you were having that first drink after being not drinking for so long?
It's very different depending on where you are on your journey with that. See, when I went to that, when I went to that first rehab, I just went there to get my girlfriend back. That was it. I went there. It was basically like being sent to jail, and I actually didn't believe there was a problem. Now, when I came out of there, I would feel guilty now and again for drinking, but I'd always blame that on that rehab place for brainwashing me. So I never really believed it. So sure, now and again I'd have my doubts. But I worked in bars, and I was around heavy drinkers all the time, and I could kind of say, well, I'm not as bad as that person. I'm not as bad as them. I used alcohol to deal with things like anxiety and low mood, like depression and stuff like that. And what happened by 25 is it just simply it stopped working. I was drinking these kind of super strength ciders, and they weren't doing anything to calm down the thinking. And then I reached the stage where I was having panic attacks, so I couldn't even buy it. I couldn't even go into an off license to buy it. If someone had said to me, you need to go to a psychiatric ward, I would have gladly gone. I wouldn't have fought that whatsoever, because that's what I felt like I needed to be. But there was no way I was going to take myself there because there was no way I was going to be able to answer anyone's questions. I was just in this terrible, terrible mental state. And the only thing I could do during that time, I used to just walk around London. And while I was walking, I used to get some relief from that. And what I didn't think about it that way, but what I was actually doing is the kind of thing I try to teach people now. I was actually trying to ground myself, really, which is almost a form of meditation. That, when we're moving, it actually moves our attention away from the racing thoughts. And when that happens, we start to get some relief. But what happened somehow I'll never really remember exactly what happened because I was in such a kind of weird mental state that I ended up getting in contact with an organization in London called ARP, which is the Alcohol Recovery Project. And they got me into their program and into a dry house. And I stayed about a year in a dry house with them.
And what kind of a drunk were you? Were you happy, go lucky kind of, or were you aggressive or?
I was never physically aggressive, but I could be very mouthy. I could be very verbally aggressive and say the wrong things and be very insulting. Particularly by the end, I was starting to kind of get barred from places. Not for never for being physically aggressive, just for basically insulting people and saying the wrong thing. Just being kind of I'd just be too mouthy.
So tell us about the move from London to Saudi Arabia. Why did you do that? How did that come about?
So what happened? So after I kind of went to that sober house, what happened was I actually managed to get my shit together so much that I was able to train to be a nurse. And I did my 3 years training and actually became a nurse. And that was kind of a profession I kind of really loved. After kind of moving into that dry house, I stopped. I did manage to stop drinking for 2 years, but I started drinking again while I was at university, like for nursing, when I was doing my diploma. But I somehow held it together, and I didn't let it interfere with my coursework, and I didn't let it interfere with my qualifying. But once I did qualify and I started working full time, I would kind of move around. I'd stay a place a year and then move somewhere else, which isn't actually that abnormal. But it was kind of getting harder to kind of separate my drinking life from my work life. I'd actually got on a holiday to Thailand, and I met some people like on Gop Yang that were traveling the world, and I realized that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take a year out and travel around the world. So I got back to Ireland and sorry, I went back I went back to Oxford. I was back in Oxford working in a hospital there. And I decided that that's what I was going to do. I realized that the best way to do that would be to go somewhere and earn a lot of money. And Saudi Arabia seemed to be the obvious thing. But also when I applied for Saudi Arabia, I had my blood checked. And after all my kind of partying in Thailand, it was obvious my liver was kind of showing, elevated, we call it elevated LFTs. So my liver function was being compromised. And so that definitely kind of, made it very certain that I needed to go to Saudi. Because my idea was that Saudi would be the perfect place for me because I'd heard there was no alcohol there because alcohol's illegal. So my idea was if I went to Saudi and you kind of go there, you get paid a lot more, it's tax free. If I went there for a year, I wouldn't be able to drink. I'd save a shitload of money and then I could go traveling around the world. That was my plan. What happened was I landed in Riyadh, in Riyadh, where the capital, and I was picked up by the hospital people, and they took me to my compound. And one of the first things they showed me were these buckets full of free alcohol that were that basically alcohol was everywhere. And I kind of realized right away this isn't going to be as dry as I thought it would be. And that alcohol was, because it's homebrew, it was actually a lot stronger than I'd ever drank before. And you never actually knew the quality of it. And I was going completely off the rails on the alcohol there. So after I suppose I can't remember exactly how long I was in Saudi, but I didn't make the full year. I actually broke my contract because I kind of felt that if I stayed there, I would end up dead. I'd just drink myself to death. And at the same time, there'd been an ambulance man who went there with the same idea as me. And, apparently he died of esophageal varices, which is where it's due to your liver, but it actually causes like these veins in your esophagus that burst and you basically drown in your own blood. It's because your liver's packed in. And I could see something similar happening to me. So I kind of realized that I needed to get out of Saudi. And I had a holiday plan to visit Vietnam. And while I was there, I kind of, ended up back in Thailand again on Ga Chang. And while I was there, I decided I just wasn't going back to Saudi. And I remember, like, being drunk, and I threw my airplane ticket into the sea in a grand gesture. And basically, I've more or less been in Thailand since then.
The first 5 years that you were in Thailand, you were drinking heavily.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that period? Where were you? Where were you living?
I would try to stop. I was living in Pisunaluk in a place called Chadagan. Um, well, I wasn't drinking all the time, actually. So my initial idea was, my new plan after the Saudi thing had failed was that I was going to become a monk. And it's something I haven't really kind of mentioned so far. See, one of the things I really got into as a kid, I got into martial arts and kung fu. And while I was doing that, like, that brought me in contact with stuff like meditation. And as a young kid, I was kind of realizing that I was, that meditation was doing something for me. And also that the kung fu I would do, you have things called kata, or forms, where you just practice these movements. I realized, but my parents were going through a bad breakup. And before I kind of really got into alcohol, I used to just train. I used to just do a lot of training. And while I was training, I'd be okay. Again, I talked about, I was grounding myself using the training. And every time I'd stop drinking, I would go back to it. I kind of always realized that that was the solution. And the problem was, I could never really stay sober long enough to make it work. So my idea was to get to Thailand, and I would just, I'd become a monk. But what I was doing initially was I was going on retreats. But in between the retreats, I would go on benders. So it's this kind of crazy situation where I was kind of, doing, and I do these really kind of crazy meditation retreats. I like to do things to the extreme. So I used to go on, there's one retreat I went to in Chiang Mai, which was it was a 26-day retreat where you start off meditating 10 hours a day. But at the end, you do this 72-hour meditation where you meditate non-stop for 72 hours. It's called a determination. And at the end of that, my mind was just so clear. I really, I felt that I'd attained Buddhahood, basically. But as soon as I left the temple, I had this kind of, really bizarre idea that seemed very reasonable at the time. I thought, well, you know what? I bet I could have a drink now and just kind of, just taste it and say goodbye to it. And that just set me in this other crazy bender that lasted months. So I kind of got into this thing, the fact that I tasted something in the meditation would always keep me coming back. And after that experience of that Wat Rampong, after that really intensive one, it made it even, more urgent to get back to it. But I would get back to it, then drink again, then get back to it. Until eventually, 17 years ago, I ended up at a temple called Wat Tham Kabok, which is the temple where I stopped drinking. And that is it's a detox temple.
That involved a 5-day projectile vomiting ceremony. Tell us about all. That's a fascinating story.
Yes, and an amazing thing was, that when I got there, the guy in the bed next to me was also from Dublin.
No way.
He was coming off heroin, yeah. 17 years ago, the internet wasn't quite as it wasn't as easy to get information as it was now. But I remember at the time I was kind of looking for any solution in Thailand. And for some reason, I'd never come across Wat Tham Kabok. My wife knew about it and she never told me. And the reason she didn't tell me was she didn't think I'd be able to do it. Because at Tham Kabok, you only get one shot. And you have to take a satya vow. And if you break the vow, Thai people believe it causes a lot of bad luck for you. So you don't want to go there unless you're going to be able to keep the vow. So she hadn't really mentioned to me, and it just somehow I just came across it by myself one evening, and I was going like, "How did I miss this?" And because I kind of realized, right away, this is what I need.
What is it? They give you medicine, or how does it work?
So what it is, they actually it's these herbs. I think it's something like 200 different herbs It's this huge concoction that they give, and they give it in a shot glass, which is really ironic. Like a spirit shot glass, and they pour it out of a Chang bottle. It's like really, really surreal. And you can kind of look on YouTube, you see videos of this, and you put this stuff in your mouth, you swallow it, and as soon as it hits your tummy, this does not belong here. And you have this big bucket of water. You just know I need to get this stuff out of me. And you just start swilling the water until you start vomiting. And that, like, the effect lasts about 30 minutes. Now, I am, as I say, I definitely feel it helped people with their withdrawals. But you know what it did for me was it really made me feel very humble. Even when I was homeless, I was still kind of looking down on people. I always thought I knew better than other people. But when you end up in a temple in Thailand on your knees, vomiting in a gutter, you really can't do that anymore. You really know that I didn't get here by any kind of mistaken identity. The only way you get here is by seriously f***ing up your life. Sorry, I'm not allowed to swear. Sorry.
You're all right. You're all right.
I don't want to get us banned. But yeah, you don't end up there by accident.
So did you know when you finished at the temple, did you walk out there knowing that that's it now, I'm not going to drink again?
Absolutely. I realized on the last day that was it, was over. And it was almost like the way I describe it now, it wasn't that I was giving it up. It was like I kind of fell out of it. I just stopped. It was like this incredible shift where I no longer saw the world the way I did before. Almost, like people might fall out of love with somebody. And it was like I just fell out of love with alcohol while I was there. And I've never had a craving for it since. It's quite bizarre.
So you don't have any urge for alcohol now?
Never.
Can you go to bars?
I could, but I don't. I mean, I've been in them, but I wouldn't want to be in them. My mother was over here a few years ago. And we bring her for bars so she gets some Irish-like food so she wouldn't starve. But I just didn't want to be in them. I see them as really sad places now. They don't. They seem quite miserable places to be nowadays. It's really strange. My wife has been to Ireland about 3 times, and she's never been inside a bar. And so
Well,
she has this very odd impression of Irish people that they probably don't drink.
what were your hangovers like? Because for me now, like, I do like a Guinness. I actually had a couple of pints last night with a friend in just off Grattan Street, in McDade's, just off Grattan Street. But today, like, I'm not hungover, but I can tell that I've had a drink. But I know myself now, like, I won't have that tonight. That'll be it now. But because, like, I genuinely get bad hangovers, but I wouldn't be able to, like, some of these guys, you hear people say, just drink through it. You wake up the next day and just get on it again. And I could never do that. Were you able to do that? Even though, like, what were your hangovers like?
And I used to love that, the kind of hair of the dog.
Yeah.
So even from a young age, I was doing that. But by the end, I had to do it. And my ability to do it would determine my day. So at the very end of my drinking, I would wake up, and my mission then was I need to drink at least 3 bottles. It was then Leo. I don't know if they still have it here in Thailand. I never check. It was this beer called Leo I used to get a lot. And if I could get through those 3 bottles, I would have a reasonably good day. But if I didn't, I would just spend the day shaking on the sofa. Before I went to Tam Kabok on the journey there, I'd actually bought some bottles and I wanted to have a farewell drink and I just couldn't even get it into me. So yeah, it was pretty grim, to say the least.
How about your life in Thailand now? Like, tell us about, like, where you're living and what are you doing?
So it's completely different now, and that's what I kind of I work in a rehab now. I work at Hope Rehab here in Thailand, and what's happened is, see, all of the things I was actually looking for with alcohol were actually very reasonable things to want. Alcohol made me feel comfortable in my own skin. Alcohol made me feel comfortable around other people. But it also, especially in the beginning, it seemed to give life this magical quality. And these are things that I have now in abundance. All of my issues, all of my anxiety, all my depression, that's all gone. You know, that the reason I don't drink is it would have absolutely nothing to give me. I kind of realize all alcohol or any drug ever does is change your perception. The great thing about, you know, the Buddhist approach, and I'm not, you know, I don't even consider myself a Buddhist. I don't try to convert people to Buddhism. I'm not about that at all. I'm about the technology. But I think Buddhism offers a particularly good path to learning how to understand your perception. And when you fully understand perception, you're then in a really good position to start changing your perception. And that the things that people are, you know, looking for, and I think, you know, pretty much everyone who turns to drugs, as far as I can see, is looking for something reasonable. And that the thing they're looking for is absolutely available. Drugs is not a good solution for that. It'll never be a good solution because any drug you take will always develop tolerance to it. And that means that, you know, as time goes on, you have to keep on taking more of it to get the same effect. And the more of it you take, the more negative consequences, you know, that there are. And eventually, kind of you reach this stage where there just is really no benefit from it whatsoever. But people will keep on going because they know better. They don't know any better. But you know, there absolutely is a way for people to get what they want. And for me, you know, so my own thing, I don't even, you know, personally find ideas like alcoholic even useful for myself personally. I'm just someone who just doesn't drink. And the reason I don't drink is because I found something better.
When you look back on it, like there's a lot of people say that it's down addiction it's down to genetics, or it's, you know, maybe trauma in someone's life or whatever. If you had to, like, what would you think would be what was the cause of your alcoholism?
I wanted to feel okay, and that was an easy solution. You know, when I found alcohol, I was actually really amazed why everyone wasn't drunk all the time. It really surprised me. I didn't understand how the adults could hold themselves back. And I would say to people, you know, you know, let's go drinking. And they go, oh, I don't like the way it makes me feel. And I go, what? You don't like to feel fucking fabulous? See, the thing about it is, it took me a long time to realize this. It was because I felt so uncomfortable in myself that alcohol had such a powerful effect on me. That people who didn't feel so uncomfortable wouldn't have that same response.
What are your future plans now? Is it the long-term life in Thailand?
Yeah, well, I've got no kind of plans to leave anytime soon. But who knows? You know, I just play it by ear. But I've kind of, you know, I've lived here now like 22 years, and you know, I'm getting older. Um, you know, the thing is, you know, I found something. I found peace, and I found a way to love life, and I want to share that with other people, and that's what I seem to be doing.
And you've written a whole book about this. It's called Dead Drunk: Saving Myself from Alcohol in a Thai Monastery. Is that available on Amazon, or
Yes,
how can people get their hands on it?
that's it. That's available on Amazon. It's in some bookstores. I think it's in libraries in Ireland as well, as far as I know. I mean, it was written a long time ago. It's like it must be about, I don't know, 12 years now, more 14 years.
But what I'll do is I'll leave all the links in the description below for your books, and also you've got a YouTube channel as well. I'll leave the link for that
Oh,
one as
great.
well. Yeah,
Thanks, Pete. That'd be great.
no worries, no worries. And listen, Paul, absolute pleasure, and thanks very much for coming on here and sharing the story. And fair play to you, like you know what you've done is it's really remarkable. You know, so many people don't beat addictions. You can see them all over the streets of Dublin. You know, there's massive homelessness here now, and you can just see sadness in people. You've been
Yes.
able to come through it and come out the other end, which is rare. So fair play to you.
And that's the thing, you know, these people, you know, they've got, all of them have got great potential. I really and truly believe that. You know, it's easy to kind of look at people who are homeless and just see them as losers,
Yeah.
but I absolutely not. You know, people that often end up. This is maybe this is what I could have meant as well. That some people are very, very sensitive, And that sensitivity can actually make them very, very creative. But it can also destroy people. That some people just feel life too much. But it's that feeling life too much that gives rise to the stories, that gives rise to the, to art and music and everything and literature, and if you look at kind of all of the Irish writers, it all came from their sensitivity.
Yeah, and best of luck with your
Maybe
yeah,
you could come and see us at Hope.
well, I would love to. That's something I would definitely consider. I've always been interested in addictions, people that have overcome them. I know numerous people over here that have got overcome drug addictions, and I've a lot of respect for people that do that. And I'd love to be able to share those stories and help people, because I know there's going to be people watching this now that do have problems. Maybe they've come out the other end, maybe they're suffering at the moment, and if we can give a bit of value and maybe help some people out there, like that's, as far as I see it, I've done my job. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Pete.
No worries, Paul. We'll chat on email anyway. Best of luck, and I'll talk to you soon. All right.
You take care.
Take care. Bye bye.